Joining us now is Rick Perlstein. He has been on the show for a while, but Rick is one of our leading, perhaps our leading political historian. He is the author of a trilogy of books on how this country got to be kind of what it is today: The Invisible Bridge, The Fall of Nixon and the Rise of Reagan. Before that, Nixonland, The Rise of a President and the Fracturing of America. And Before the Storm, Barry Goldwater and the Unmaking of the American Consensus. He is also based in Chicago and a keen observer of the Chicago political scene. Chicago is the home of WCPT, where we are broadcast, or as we say, Chicago's Progressive Talk. And he joins us now to talk about the surprise resignation, or let's say not resignation, but Rahm Emanuel's surprise decision not to run again for mayor and the current state of play there. So first of all, Rick, thanks for coming on the program.
Hi, RJ. Good to be here.
Good to have you back. Secondly, so let's talk first about what I described as a surprise announcement that Rahm Emanuel wasn't going to run again, to which I say good riddance. But was it as big a surprise in Chicago or to you as it was to the rest of us around the country?
It was a colossal surprise. Really only one person in the media here, a columnist for the Sun-Times, seemed to have kind of predicted it a week out. Just kind of reading the entrails, he saw that Rahm Emanuel had commissioned an internal poll that he released that said he was running strong. You know, why would he do this at this point in time, other than to either, basically, that kind of suggested either he was going to run or maybe he wasn't going to run, by saying he could have won if he did run. And, I have friends over town who, are in various positions, public and otherwise, and none of them said that they saw any sort of prior indication, including people working in City Hall.
So any clue why he might have done this? I mean, he already made a fair amount of money when he left the White House. By fair amount of money, I mean astonishing. Yeah. And so, I mean, I suppose he could always be leaving to do that, or maybe despite what his internal polling may have said, he may have seen political writing on the wall. Any clues since then as to why he might have?
It's still definitely in the speculation stage. The lesser informed folks from, around the country are like, oh, he must be running for president. But that's ridiculous. I think he's, dead in the water in today's Democratic Party. There's a very important local event that's just starting with great melodrama in Chicago, and that's the trial of a fellow named Jason Van Dyke, right, a police officer who shot a gentleman, young African-American named Laquan McDonald, 16 times. If you want to get the background on this astonishing case, you can download a really wonderful podcast from our public radio station, WBEZ, called 16 Shots. But basically this happened quite a long time before this election came up. In fact, before Rahm Emanuel's reelection, but they withheld the tape, the police tape, and it was released after the election. And it became very, very apparent that the police narrative was a complete cover-up, that this kid was shot when he was doing nothing. And this trial is going to be galvanizing. And if this cop is acquitted, people think there's a very good chance that there could be riots. And Rahm Emanuel is directly implicated in the cover-up. And so that's probably the most proximate political reason why he'd be afraid to run. We have a runoff system. The top two candidates face each other, and it looked like almost certain that there would be a runoff. He couldn't get 50% of the vote. And kind of the best testimony I've heard from people who have reasonably good sources is that actually the cliche, spend more time with your family, seems to be quite possible. He just sent his kids off to college, to be sure, but he has a very intelligent and accomplished wife. Her name's Amy Rule, who's basically put her life on the back burner for, a good solid 20 years now. And apparently she put her foot down. She really was sick of the grind and didn't want a campaign in which, as would certainly have been the case, he was the focus of vituperation from every quarter. So there it is. What comes next, we don't know. My guess would be he's going to go make a lot of money, maybe with Elon Musk, to whom he gave an absolutely absurd contract to create like some kind of magic carpet from downtown to O'Hare Airport.
So, I hadn't even focused on that. I mean, what I know at this point about Rahm Emanuel, and obviously the question now is what happens to Chicago, but what I know about Rahm Emanuel basically, and it's not an insignificant amount, is instrumental in moving the Democratic Party to the right, to held party positions, was Obama's chief of staff, again instrumental in moving the Democratic Party to the right. As mayor, my understanding is not only was he implicated in a cover-up on the Laquan McDonald case, but also on systematic police abuse and violence. And is that, first of all, that's correct? Is that correct?
I think that's fair to say. Certainly the abuse is systematic, and that he's, backed the force to the hilt. And, that required the Justice Department to come in with a consent decree. So there it is. And
I think there's been a fair amount of privatization on his watch in Chicago.
That's right.
And of which I suppose the Elon Musk would be probably the most extreme and arguably the least practical of these various privatization schemes. I'm just guessing I've seen what Elon Musk has proposed in Los Angeles, and I've looked at it at great length, even though I don't live there anymore, and it strikes me that it's just preposterous. It's just a nutty idea. You'd think the guy was smoking something. So I don't know about his Chicago plan, but if it's anything like his
Elon Musk is smoking something. He went on he went on someone's podcast and smoked a doobie.
That was my reference actually. And if his Chicago if his Chicago proposal is half as cockeyed as his Los Angeles proposal, it's basically just a wealth transfer at the expense of the people of Chicago. But I don't really know that much about it.
Fair enough. Folks who are listening to us on WCPT in Chicago, the A1 ace reporter on Rahm Emanuel is a fellow named Ben Joravsky. And he has a weekly column in our Chicago Reader, and he has a daily show on WCPT, and you can hear all about it. But, I mean, basically, the claim is that no public funds are going to be spent on this, which basically is code for they're going to spend public funds on infrastructure related to the project, which is what they're doing with the Obama Library. They said that wasn't going to cost anything, but it turns out it's going to cost $30 million to dig up the road, and this much money to dig the tunnel underneath Lakeshore Drive, and pretty much adding up to some serious money on very dubious pretexts. So signing away the public commonweal to corporate interests is pretty much the alpha and the omega of Rahm Emanuel's model for growth in Chicago, with a little bit of school closings and mental health facilities on the side.
Right. And then, of course, comes a time when you have to pay because you're paying some private company to use their resources or to...
It's all this privatization stuff is all about kicking cans down the road. The bill comes due 50 years from now, and then you have some other clown, to be left holding the bag. Now, interestingly, Rahm Emanuel was left holding the bag for some very poor fiscal decisions by the previous mayor, Richard M. Daley, who was kind of he loved building grand projects like our Millennium Park and things like that, and left the city in terrible fiscal shape. And that's, I think, why people entrusted Rahm Emanuel in the first place with all this power. This idea was he's friends with all these bankers, which he is. One time the Chicago Reader FOIA'd his secret schedule and found that all he did was meet with bankers and private interests and never with community leaders. And that somehow he would be able to kind of cut the deals that would allow us to take care of this enormous deficit. And lo and behold, that hasn't been working out at all. He announced something with great fanfare several years ago called an infrastructure trust. And there's absolutely been zero projects created through said trusts. But the enabling legislation passed by the city council, which for some inexplicable reason always ends up voting for 47-3 or 48-2 on these sorts of things, allowed the city to basically go through all sorts of procedural shortcuts to get whatever the mayor wanted done. So he's accomplished some things. To be fair, he's very serious about transportation and bike lanes and things like that, and that's been pretty effective. He also is serious about environmental sustainability. There was a very nice feature on what Chicago might look like in 2050, which talked about what the city is doing to try and head off the damages of global warming. Things like creating parks that can absorb excess water and things like that. So he's not completely lining his pockets and fiddling while Rome burns.
So he's done. So Rick Perlstein. So he's done some good things. He's continued, I would say, in the sort of, for lack of a better word, the neoliberal corporate Democrat tradition of Richard Daley, who preceded him. But as you say, he's done a couple good things too. But now, as the inheritor of that tradition from Daley, he's leaving, and he hasn't left a logical heir behind him, or someone who's picking up his ideological mantle, as far as I can tell, who's an obvious choice. So it seems to me, observing it from Washington, D.C., that it's proven
not to be an empire builder when it comes to City Hall. There is no logical successor, and he's basically left us an election which is extraordinarily chaotic, with no sort of resolution in sight. So who knows what's going to happen next in our city? There's all sorts of candidates from all sides of the political spectrum, some of them viable, some of them not, but none of them could be said to be Rahm Emanuel people, with the possible exception of a guy named Paul Vallis, who is a former lieutenant governor and kind of an avid school privatizer, but he was running against Rahm Emanuel.
So we've got Vallis, I'm looking at the list now, Dorothy Brown, Cook County Circuit Court clerk. We have Amara. Sorry?
She's been indicted.
Oh, okay. All right. Never mind. Amara Enya, attorney and community activist. Jamal Green, 22 years old. John Kozlar, looks to be a broker of some kind, insurance broker of some kind. Troy LaRaviere.
Yes, wonderful, progressive, great critic of Rahm Emanuel's education policies, who I would have loved to have been able to support, but proved completely incapable of building a political organization. He doesn't even have like a Wikipedia page. At the Pride Parade, he had like 4 people marching with him. So that's kind of a tragic lost opportunity. But anyway, continuing.
So anyway, Gary McCarthy, ex-police superintendent.
He's the former police chief. He was the police chief when the shooting happened,
Right.
I mean, it's ridiculous. He's the law and order candidate. He's going to be the Frank Rizzo.
Right. And he doesn't have any chance, does he?
No, he has a chance. Sure.
Oh, he does? Oh, okay.
Like getting to that runoff, the top 2 candidates.
Lori Lightfoot, former Chicago Police Board president, running on police.
Unfortunately, she has a very similar constituency to the county board president, Tony Preckwinkle, who probably, not probably, but would have a very, very strong chance of winning, but she might not run. She has kind of family complications. So it's these kind of calculations about who's going to run and who's going to knock who out, who's going to take whose constituency are just extraordinarily complex.
We don't have much time, do we?
The election's in March.
Right.
First round. And then there'll be a runoff, I think like a month later or something like that. And you got to, get 12,000 signatures, which is nothing. It's a very robust challenge of tradition, I should say, of petition challenging in Chicago. So you probably got to get twice that. So, you need some money and organization to get this done. So it's hard unless you're a Toni Preckwinkle to kind of jump in with both feet and make this happen in time. I think that you need the signatures by December.
So, yeah, I mean, we could wind up with one or two candidates out of this enormous pool, or I suppose multiple candidates, quite a few. Probably this was not a comprehensive list I was reading from. So I guess my final question for you is, from an on-the-ground perspective, and I hope to be coming there soon, but from an on-the-ground perspective, is this kind of a fun, exciting, turbulent time, or just a depressing, chaotic, gray, turbulent time?
Yeah, I mean, speaking, as a progressive, I don't really detect any sense of, wow, this is our moment. So often, as is so often the case, there's no consensus candidate of sort of the three progressive constituencies in Chicago: African Americans, Hispanics, themselves divided between Mexicans and Puerto Ricans, and what they call lakefront liberals, which basically means, kind of white liberal professionals. The last person to assemble anything resembling a coalition between the three of those was Harold Washington, and that was, 30 years ago now. So I think it's just pretty much a state of confusion.
Well, we'll keep watching, because it is one of the most important cities on the planet, because we love it, and because we would love to see progressive leadership there. So, sorry?
It's not impossible.
Well, good. It's not impossible, or rousing words to live by. So we'll keep watching. I know you will too, and maybe you'll come back on and update us at some point if you're game. But Rick Perlstein, historian, author of The Invisible Bridge and so many other books, Nixon Land, thanks for keeping an eye on it, and thanks for coming on the program.
My pleasure.